Okay, so to start with the disclosure slide, I have nothing to disclose. And indeed, I'm a PhD student, and my main focus is the measles epidemic of 2013. And today I will be talking about the vaccine effectiveness of an early MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccination given to infants of 6 to 14 months of age, while normally it is given at the age of 14 months in the Netherlands. I will start with some background information about the measles epidemic, then a short introduction of the early MMR campaign. Then I will explain how I estimated the vaccine effectiveness. I will show results, and then in the end I will try to answer the question whether we should implement this early MMR vaccination again in a future outbreak. Laura already explained this. Basically, so in 1976 we started with the introduction of the measles vaccination. Since then we also have the disease is also notifiable. Since 1987 we started with the 14 months and 9 years of age, so a 2-dose program. For the first dose we have a vaccination coverage of 95%, for the second one 93%, and this means actually for the second dose that 93% of 10-year-olds had 2 doses. Yet there are outbreaks in the Netherlands, so we had a big one in 1988 with more than 1,500 cases, another one in 2000 with more or less 3,200 cases, and then more recently in 2013-2014. And during this outbreak, 2,700 cases were reported. The outbreak started in May 2013 and ended in March 2014, and it quickly, the number of weekly reported cases quickly increased towards 180 per week in July. But then the summer holiday started, so that measles transmission reduced, leading to a lower weekly reported cases. And then after the summer holiday, it increased again to more or less 130 weekly cases in October, and then quickly it decreased until very low numbers of cases per week. So then on the 17th of June, the outbreaks management team came together, and they talked about several interventions, and one of them was the early MMR. This was at the blue line. And they decided to protect infants between 6 and 14 months of age. So then infants between 6 and 11 months were given 3 doses in total. So one, for example, at 6 months, then another one at 14 months of age, and then the third one at 9 years of age. And infants of 12 or 13 months of age, they received only an early vaccination, and then their second one will be at 9 years of age. The intervention was implemented from July until the end of the epidemic. And in the first week of the intervention, all infants were invited, so all infants between 6 and 14 months of age were invited, and afterwards, so in all the following weeks, infants were invited who turned 6 months of age. So, for example, if you have a child or infant, and this infant becomes 6 months in October, then you would also be included in this intervention. Not all infants in the Netherlands were invited for this early MMR. Only those infants who were living in the 29 municipalities with a coverage of less than 90%. So it's actually all those municipalities in the Bible Belt. So why did they implement this intervention? Well, first of all, infants are at the highest risk for complications, especially pneumonia. And secondly, there is a gap of immunity. So infants start with maternal antibodies, and they are protected for more or less, at least at 6 months of age, most are again susceptible to measles. So you see that those who are born to natural immune women, 95% of them lost their maternal antibodies at 6 months of age, while this is for vaccinated women at 99%. And this is of course because with a natural infection you get more antibodies in comparison with a vaccine-induced immunity. The aim of this talk will be indeed to assess the effectiveness of this early MMR. Other aims were, for example, also to test whether this vaccine is safe. And another one is was to assess the immune responses to this early MMR, but also what kind of impact does it have on subsequent MMRs. And this will be a talk by Iris. How did it work? Well, first they received the invitation to the vaccination. First they were offered the vaccination, and 4 weeks later they were invited to the study, and they did this to not interfere with the decision to vaccinate or no. Then if they want to participate, they had to send back a form, and in this form they filled in their email address, and then later on they would receive a link to the online baseline questionnaire. They were also then instructed to report measles during the follow-up until the end of the epidemic, and then if their infant if they suspected their infant to have measles, they had to send an email back to the research team, and then they received the secondary questionnaire and a measles saliva test kit to sample some saliva from their infant. And then what was collected? Well, in the baseline questionnaire, questions were about measles in the preceding 3 months. And there were questions to determine whether this measles was clinical. So then, did the infant show fever, a rash, and at least one of the following symptoms: cough, runny nose, or sore eyes? And then other questions included, for example, gender, but also if their infant attended a daycare center, and the vaccination status of other family members. And in the second questionnaire, we had similar questions also to determine clinical measles, and then the saliva was collected to detect IgM antibodies, which indicate a recent measles infection. The outcome, so we estimated vaccine effectiveness against laboratory confirmed measles, but also clinical measles. And then the vaccine effectiveness can be calculated 1 minus some kind of risk ratio, and in this case we have survival data, so we follow a vaccinated group of infants and an unvaccinated group of infants during the follow-up. And with this data then we can use a Cox proportional hazard model to estimate the hazard ratio, and then we can have the simple formula: the vaccine effectiveness is 1 minus the hazard ratio times 100. The results, so we started with 10,097 infants who were addressed for the MMR vaccination. Then some could not be addressed because they opted out to be addressed for research studies. So in total we invited 9,974 infants for the study, 1,866 registered, and then in the end 1,304 parents of infants filled in the baseline questionnaire. Unfortunately, 74 parents did not allow us to check their vaccination status of the infant in the National Registry, so we ended up with 1,230 infants eligible for analysis. So in total we had 1,230 infants, then 919 were vaccinated and 311 were unvaccinated. In this sample we have a vaccination coverage of 75%, and this actually nicely reflects the vaccination coverage in these 29 municipalities. In terms of gender, the groups are comparable in both more or less 50% are boys and 50% are girls. But if you look at other variables, for example, daycare center attendance, vaccinated infants were more likely to attend a daycare center. And on the other hand, unvaccinated infants were more likely to have unvaccinated family members, but they were also more likely to go to a church with a low vaccine uptake. So in the Netherlands we have the Orthodox Protestants, and it doesn't mean, so these are the group who refuse to vaccinate, but not all Orthodox Protestants refuse to vaccinate. So there's a graduation in the high vaccine uptake in this community. So some churches have vaccination coverage comparable to the rest of the Netherlands, while others have a vaccination coverage as low as 25%. And as you see that there's a higher percentage of unvaccinated children, infants in these communities. Then the follow-up data. So in total we found 3 cases in the vaccinated group for outcome laboratory confirmed measles, and 10 in the unvaccinated group. And if you see that actually there's way more days in the observation time for the vaccinated group than with the unvaccinated group, so the number of cases per observation time is in this case much higher in the unvaccinated group. A similar picture can be seen for outcome self-reported clinical measles. Again, at 20 vaccinated cases, 37 unvaccinated cases, and again the number of cases is per observation time is higher in the unvaccinated group. This data can also be visualized in a graph. On the y-axis we have the cumulative incidence, in this case for laboratory confirmed measles. On the x-axis is time, and then the blue line is the vaccinated group, and the red line is the unvaccinated group. And what you can see is that every time when a case is occurring, there's a bend in the line. So we had 3 vaccinated cases. There's 3 bends here, one there, one there, and similar for the unvaccinated group. And what is nice to see is that the lines diverge. So it means that unvaccinated infants have a higher risk of getting measles than vaccinated infants. What is also nice that all 13 cases were occurring in the months September, October, November. This is exactly when the second peak was occurring in the epidemic. Then the graph for the self-reported measles. Well, what you see now is that the lines are closer to each other, so the difference in risk is less big as in the laboratory-confirmed measles. And what you also see is that the cases are occurring throughout the whole period. And I think this shows that the outcome self-reported measles is less reliable than the outcome laboratory-confirmed measles. Then the vaccine effectiveness. So first we estimated the unadjusted hazard ratio, which was 0.06 for laboratory-confirmed measles and 0.33 for self-reported measles. And this means that vaccinated infants are less likely or have lower hazards to get measles than unvaccinated infants. And this corresponds to an unadjusted vaccine effectiveness of 94% in the for those who vaccinate. So those who vaccinate have a reduced risk of 94%, and this is 67% in the self-reported, for outcome self-reported measles. But as you saw that in the baseline table, these groups are not comparable in terms of vaccination status of family members and also which religion they adhere. And this also means that the probability of being exposed to measles is different in these two groups. So therefore we try to control for this type of confounding. And then the unadjusted vaccine effectiveness dropped from 94% to 71%. And for self-reported measles, this dropped from 67% to 43%. Unfortunately, there's low numbers, so the uncertainty around this estimate are quite big, as you can see in the confidence intervals. But then what can we conclude? Well, we can conclude that the vaccinated infants had a reduced risk compared with the unvaccinated infants. However, this 94% is not completely attributable to the vaccine, but is also part of the herd immunity of the national measles immunization program. And then if we compare it with estimates from the literature, well, there's a systematic review with 44 vaccine effectiveness estimates. They are all with outcome laboratory confirmed measles. And they are all from case control or cohort studies like ours. You see that for 12 months and older, the vaccine effectiveness is 92%, and then for 9 to 11 months, it's 84%. So you can see that the younger you vaccinate, the lower the vaccine effectiveness. Then, should we vaccinate infants between 6 and 40 months of age again during a future outbreak? Well, it's also nice to know that this early MMR was well tolerated, so the frequencies of local and systemic adverse events were comparable or lower in infants between 6 and 8 months of age compared with infants aged 40 months. Then we saw indeed that there is a lower vaccine effectiveness, but those who do not seroconvert the first time, they have a high chance of seroconverting at the second dose. So what you saw is that for the first dose, they didn't develop protective antibodies, but after the second dose, they did seroconvert. This means you kind of can catch up for the lost vaccine effectiveness. So indeed, so the infants are susceptible after 6 months of age. They have a highest risk of complications. So is it then a matter of connecting the dots, and should we vaccinate our kids in a future outbreak? Well, there's one last issue which I did not address, and this is as a result of this issue, there was a higher risk of measles when the first dose of measles, of its 2-dose schedule of measles vaccination is given at 12 to 14 months of age versus 15 months of age. So during this outbreak in Canada, 2-dose vaccinated individuals were exposed to measles, and those who actually had their first dose at 12 to 14 months of age had a higher risk of getting measles than those at 15 months of age. And this has probably to do with something about the development of antibodies, and this is something Iris will be talking about in the next talk. And then I would like to thank several persons. including my group, which is the picture you already saw before.